Which of the 5 types of lab coats is best for you? Is this one a waste of money, and will this one secretly try to kill you? All the different lab coat options, materials, and colors can be a little bit confusing and overwhelming at first. There's chemical compatibility charts, there's sizing issues, and what is Howie style anyway? But no worries, I've spent the last 3 years learning about lab coats, including a survey of over 1,500 scientists that I call the Lab Coat Project. And I'm putting everything I learned into this short video organized into the 5 major classes of lab coats you'll find. I'll cover the normal requirements for college chemistry class, why doctors and scientists actually need different lab coats, and how you'll find one that doesn't just check the boxes but actually makes you look and feel great. So by the end, you'll be an expert too. You'll find exactly what you need at the best value and show up to class or work on day 1 with confidence without ending up like the race car drivers whose tragedy kickstarted the development of the Class 5 lab coats. But first, lab coat Class 1. I call it the polyester trash bag. These have been called many names in our survey, but my favorite quotes are: 1, it looks like I'm wearing a potato sack. 2, I look in the mirror and see a white rectangle. And 3, I'm basically just wearing a tent. These are the bottom of the barrel lab coats. You'll find them on Amazon for usually less than $25 and sometimes at your college bookstore for a little bit larger markup. Let's try one on. I'm now wearing the best-selling lab coat on Amazon by Voguery, and it's garbage. Look how this fits me. And here's my wife wearing the women's version. From the main photos, these may appear to be lab coats that would work, but if you look more closely, you'll see a lot of issues. First, these all have really high polyester content, usually more than 60%. This is risky because if polyester catches fire, it will actually melt and harden onto your skin, which will trap you inside. Compare this to 100% cotton. So cotton still burns, but it disintegrates into ash, which actually lessens the damage. Here's a direct comparison I made burning a strip of each. This is why I also won't wear a polyester shirt while using a gas grill, and why you shouldn't wear polyester shirts or pants in the lab either if you're working with heater flames. Kind of like those athletic shirts and yoga pants that we like to wear. Now you might be thinking, I don't work with flames, but do you work with anything that can create flames? Metal powders, other strong oxidizing powders, and most solvents are flammable. An exothermic reaction, an oxygen gas line leak, or even a spark from a hot plate wire can all cause a flash fire. Now polyester is pretty good against acids. It also keeps germs and such from moving through it because it's not very permeable, which is why polyester and other synthetic materials are often used as a disposable lab coat and around biological contaminants. So the other downsides of polyester are that A, it tends to trap heat, which can make you overheat a little bit in a warm lab, and 2, it can be a little itchy on the skin. Just look at the reviews on Amazon for these. When I polled the early supporters of the lab coat project, 100% cotton was the #1 most requested material across every discipline. That's because it's breathable, yet mechanically tough if it's a good twill weave. It's also soft to the touch and can be bleached over and over again. So we'll get to that soon. The second thing about these lab coats is that they have these big plastic buttons, and these are a lot cheaper to make than the strong metal snaps. The buttons can also melt in a fire or when exposed to different chemicals or solvents, which can actually trap you inside during an accident. So compare these to those strong metal snaps, which you can Superman your way out of in an emergency or if you're just late to lunch. And in the lab coat project survey, chemists preferred metal snaps 3 to 1. Just listen to Niall Red explain his frustration with them.
The biggest fan of this, and I much prefer the variety that use those snap-on things that you can just pull and instantly take them all off. In an emergency, especially if you're panicking, you might fumble with the buttons and it could be a problem.
You should also look at the number of buttons or snaps. If there's only 3 or 4, you might get these gaps popping up in the middle when you bend over or sit like this. So look for at least 5 or 6 snaps. So the third thing is these usually have these really big open cuffs. Just look at this dumb stock footage. So even with nitrile gloves on, these leave your wrist exposed to drips of acid or solvents when you reach in the fume hood. And if you're working with cells like in microbiology lab, when you reach, you might actually have skin or hairs fall into your cell cultures. So keep yourself out of your experiments and get these soft, flexible knit cuffs that can fully cover your wrist. So the fourth thing is these are usually unisex, meaning that they are kind of shaped like a barrel and will make you feel like you're wearing a trash bag. In our lab coat project survey data, women's voices especially came through on this. They said that unisex really just means it's designed for men, but they're trying to sell it to women. It was especially hard for petite women to find a good fit with these. More than half saying that the waist was cut too wide, the shoulders were too boxy, and it was too long. One survey respondent even said, being swallowed by a giant lab coat makes you feel like you are dressing up in a costume. It creates a strange imposter syndrome that whispers in your ear, you're not a real scientist. Reading that, it hit me that we need to make something better because scientists deserve workwear that they actually love. So we'll get to that more in class 3. So in summary, just don't buy these class 1 lab coats ever unless you need a cheap mad scientist Halloween costume. But speaking of Halloween, you might actually love the black option we have in the 3rd class. But first, let's level up. I gotta get out of this thing. So lab coat class 2. I call these the better basics. These lab coats are typically in the $25 to $45 range on Amazon, maybe $40 to $60 on a website like Fisher Scientific. There's a little bit of more thought put into design. Some of them have metal snaps or knit cuffs, but most of these will not be 100% cotton. So this is a good time to cover what exactly are the requirements for a college chemistry lab class. So the most common one you'll see is 100% cotton, which we already talked about. Number 2, the length of the lab coat should be within a few inches of your knees, ideally just below them. If you're about 5 feet tall, that's typically around 35 to 37 inches. And if you're 6 feet or taller, that's usually 41 to 43 inches. Most will also want metal snaps, which we talked about, and they will also recommend having these long knit cuffs. And some will also ask for a Howie style lab coat, which tends to be double-breasted with a really high collar, but sometimes they just want a high collar that can be buttoned all the way to the top. So for this class 2, let me give you one more example. So I'm now wearing a red cap lab coat, which is also really popular on Amazon. I actually got it embroidered because I thought it would be a good one to wear around before we had our own lab coats. Now you can see it's got actually 4 plastic buttons instead of 3, which is a little improvement. It's got an extra pen stitch right here, which helps a little bit for organizing your markers. Even it has these little side vents, which you can reach your hands into your pocket. But the problem is these get caught on doorknobs all the time, so watch out for that. It even has a belt, which you can't see, and it looks like it would help pull it into the waist, but it doesn't actually work. Now let's look at one other red cap lab coat that's pretty popular on Amazon. Hey look, it's got 6 metal snaps, check. Knit cuffs, check. It even closes at the top of the neck, check. And it's pretty long, even though it doesn't really say the length, probably 39 or 40 inches. But it's weirdly cheap, and yep, it's 80% polyester. So this one could be okay in some biology or dissection type work, but it's a hard no in any general chemistry lab or while working around heater flames. All right, another example. Let's look at this lab coat from Adar. It's got a great fit for women, especially for only $38, but it is 65% polyester and it's very short at 36 inches. It has big plastic buttons, and look at how that collar goes so low on her chest. This is definitely a healthcare lab coat, and it's not made for use in labs. As a general rule, if you see a stethoscope or scrubs in a photo, run. It is not good for scientists. So which lab coats actually meet the requirements for general chemistry labs? Well, not many, at least not for under $80 or $100. And that's why I started the lab coat project. So that brings me to class 3. I'm calling class 3 the tactical cotton lab coat. Let's say you couldn't find the exact lab coat you wanted, so you decided to design your own. And you really wanted to get it right, so you got about 1,500 scientists from social media and Reddit to answer a survey about their perfect lab coat. Then let's say you crunched all that data and made exactly the lab coat that everybody wanted, you would get something like this. Of course, I'm putting this one in its own class because I made it, but it's also at a mixture of price and features that doesn't actually match anything else. So honestly, I think it's fair. Let's take a look at how it meets the general chemistry lab requirements. Number 1, it's 100% cotton. We actually made a custom twill weave that's mechanically very resistant to puncture, and the surface threads are woven so tightly that it's actually a little bit hydrophobic to drops of water, blood, or even coffee. Number 2, it's a full-length lab coat, and it falls around the knees. The women's extra small is still 38 inches, and the men's 4XL is 43 inches, so that gives you an idea of the range. Oh, and no unisex lab coats here. We don't believe in that. So number 3, they've got these big stainless steel snaps. They won't melt in a fire, they won't rust, and they're easy to find and pop out of really quickly if you're late for happy hour. Number 4, the cuffs are by far everyone's favorite feature. I was warned several times by customers never to change them, ever. They're longer than most to cover long arms when you're reaching, and the forearms are tapered so that you don't have this extra fabric hanging around ready to knock over glassware. And in our poll, scientists were actually split on having the collar up or down. So we made this one do both. So you can wear this low for comfort, but you can also pop it up if you're ready to get your hands dirty. There's tons of other hidden features in here, from zippered side vents that won't catch on cabinet handles, to dedicated utensil slots that won't let your markers fall out, to even a hidden adjustable belt and pleats in the back so that you can get a tailored but comfortable fit. And honestly, I don't want to stop at just a white cotton lab coat. One person on Reddit told me, "White is so lame, like what the f***? I'm trying to look hot while I'm murdering yeast cells." So we took a vote, and the color that scientists wanted most after white was black. So we gave the people what they wanted. Now's a good time to talk about lab coat colors. So most are white, and from our survey data, more than 60% of scientists were actually happy with white. The best thing about white lab coats is that they show contamination well, but it can also show permanently even after proper decontamination and cleaning. Blue lab coats tend to have some fire resistance, which I'll get to in class 5, but not all of them, so make sure to check the labels. If you work with white powders, salts, or white mice, a blue or black lab coat might actually show the contamination better than a white lab coat, while also permanently hiding stains and yellowing from sweat. Some labs even color code their lab coats to prevent cross-contamination in different work areas or to signal the safety features that each one has. And sometimes it just doesn't matter. You might want to express yourself and just feel great, and that's okay too. So we made this black one first because that's what everybody voted for, but we sampled all these other colors already. Which one do you like best? Type your answer of what you want us to make next in the comments below while we finish up this video. So I'll get to class 4 and 5 in a second, but if you're just looking for general college chemistry class, organic chemistry lab, or microbiology, type 4 and type 5 actually aren't going to be for you. So if you want to get this one, just follow the link below to our site to get our latest lab coat availability and updates. And honestly, these keep selling out, so if you don't see your size in stock, just get on our email list to make sure that you get the updates when we get restocked. And whenever we're thinking about making a new product, we send out surveys to our customers to get feedback. So if you want to participate and help us design the next lab coat, make sure you're on that email list. I'll make sure that the link is in the description below. Okay, so if you're not concerned about lab work, but you work in healthcare, the next class is for you. But if you do highly hazardous chemistry or work with high explosion and fire risks, go ahead and skip to class 5. So lab coat class 4, the doctor's white coat. There are a huge range of white coats for doctors, but in this class, I just want to focus on the really good ones. These usually fall in the $100 to $250 range, and the two most popular brands are Metalita and Figs. They're tailored like a suit, they have really well-designed pockets, stylish trims, and are made of high-tech materials, but keep in mind these are not for lab research. For one, just look at these photos. They're all being worn open in the front, and most of them are just too short for lab work. They only cover to the top of your thighs, which is not a great length for lab research, but it works for office visits. They also have these big plastic buttons that are more for decoration and won't let you get out quickly in an emergency. They have straight cuffs that don't protect your wrist when you reach, but that makes it feel like a suit. So one big difference is that they're often made of fabric with a specialized antimicrobial coating. This is a great feature in a clinical setting for protecting the doctor or nurse from germs and blood and such. Some are even blended with spandex or rayon to make them more flexible, but the problem is that these burn violently. Watch this side by side of the 100% cotton next to one of these brands' high-tech materials. I won't name names, and of course they both burn, but do you see how violently the medical one just goes up in flames? And lastly, just look at that price tag. A doctor's white coat will rarely get dirty and may last them like 5 to 10 years, especially with their budget. It's an easy buy, but if you're working in a lab, you'll likely need a new lab coat every year or two. So it just doesn't make sense to shell out over $100 unless you absolutely need it. But if you're working in healthcare, these are incredibly well-designed white coats that are going to last you a long time. So that brings me to the final class, lab coat class 5, the specialty materials. So these class 5 lab coats are usually the light blue and the navy blue lab coats that you see industrial chemists wearing, and they can actually cost over $200. Now the design isn't usually anything special, just a few pockets, metal snaps, knit cuffs, and a high collar. It checks all the safety boxes there. The magic here is in the materials, and they are truly the best of the best. So there's 3 types of materials I want to cover here. The one you might have heard of already is called FR for flame resistant or flame retardant, like this. So these need to have something called an NFPA 2112 certification, which means that it passed a flash fire burn test on a mannequin by only having less than 50% second and third degree burns. It's set to 50% because over 50% you're unlikely to survive. So this might sound scary. Yes, you can still be seriously injured even wearing an FR lab coat, especially if it's a chemical fire, which soaks onto it before it burns. That's why it's your last line of defense, not your first. You might also see a burn percent if you look really closely at the lab coat specs, and it might be 15 or 40%. This is one way to compare how good the FR is between different FR lab coats. And for FR, you actually need to be really careful about the washing. Some FR garments are coated, normally called flame retardant. They might be 100% cotton or 88% cotton and 12% nylon. They pass the burn test, but if you wash them under the wrong conditions, they might lose that coating over time, and that puts you in danger from a future fire. So these coated FR lab coats can work great and they're used all the time. You just have to be careful how you wash them. Other FR garments say inherent, meaning the fibers themselves resist the burning, not just the coating. These usually are immune to laundering mistakes except bleach, and these are called flame resistant, not retardant. So it's legally possible to claim FR protection without the extensive testing required for a UL and an NFPA 2112 certification. So be careful what you choose. If I'm looking for FR, I would personally not choose anything without the NFPA 2112 certification. Some FR lab coats will also show an ARC rating, like 4 is okay and 9 is really good, but this doesn't really apply to most scientists. It has to do with how flammable the lab coat is when it's exposed to high energy sparks. I won't get into that anymore, but I'll do a deeper dive on lab coat materials in another video. But for now, check the link in the description below for a blog post that I go really deep on the materials of lab coats. Okay, so you're probably thinking, but this FR lab coat's not light blue or navy blue. And you are exactly right, but you'll notice it's kind of yellow, right? And so if you look at my sleeve, you can see the difference between the pure white cuff and the a kind of yellower lab coat material here. This is a prototype that we got, and there's a reason why they advise us not to do white, and it's because the little secret in the FR industry is that these materials tend to turn yellow or gray over time because the fibers are more naturally yellow. Now, they can be dyed white like this one, but we expect that to fade over time. Plus, if it's blue, it's just easier to tell who has an FR lab coat on. So besides FR, lots of scientists also search for things like chemical proof lab coats, sometimes called CR for chemical resistant or CP for chemical proof. The thing is, these don't really exist. Every chemical reacts differently to different materials, so no material is bulletproof in a lab. Cotton, for example, is permeable, but acids will eat holes in it. Polyester, on the other hand, is actually really good against acids, but not so great with some solvents. The best you'll find are lab coats that say they protect you from minor splashes. That means it may still soak in or eat holes in it, but you have a few seconds to at least take it off before it gets through. These are usually made of synthetic fibers that aren't permeable. The problem is these are extremely dangerous around heat and flames. When working with extra hazardous materials, the best thing to do is to add an apron or special acid handling butyl gloves that protect you from that specific chemical. Rubber and PVC aprons like this are usually the best. So before you get too disappointed that I said chemical proof lab coats don't exist, let me tell you about the final lab coat we're going to talk about today, which is actually the best of both worlds. So what do race car drivers and scientists have in common? Well, there's a special lab coat fabric called Nomex, which was invented by DuPont in the 1960s after 3 high-profile race car drivers died from fires during races in Charlotte and Indianapolis. So quick shout out to Wilfred Sweeney, the scientist who was credited with inventing Nomex at DuPont. So Nomex is actually the trade name from DuPont, but the general chemical name of the fibers is aramid or aramid fibers, sharing a root word with aromatic, which are the backbones of the molecules that it's made of. It's similar to Kevlar fibers, but mechanically a little bit less tough. So it's inherently flame resistant, not just a coating. It's actually used all over the world for protection by pilots, military, and firefighters, and it can even take temperatures up to 700 degrees Fahrenheit. Even though those lab coats can feel thin, like 4.5 ounces is the fabric weight versus this one's about 6.7, it can actually swell up and form a char barrier under high heat, so it's super protective. This shuts off the pores and it causes it to actually self-extinguish. Even better, there's a new version called Nomex IIIA. It's Nomex blended with 5% Kevlar and 2% anti-static fibers that prevent static buildup and reduce the risk of shocks, which can also start fires or damage your electronic equipment. So you'll see Nomex IIIA fibers used in the best fabric available that I know of, the Westex Shield CXP fabric. It's only in a few lab coats, like this one from Bulwark, but just watch them pour this Piranha solution over the top of it. Look at the difference in chemical resistance over those other 2 fabrics. Now you might recognize that color of material or that lab coat because that's the same one that Niall Red is wearing when he's doing his higher risk experiments. So these lab coats actually have some real chemical resistance. The chemical compatibility chart shows that it handles acids really well along with polar solvents, but it does not handle non-polar solvents very well, like toluene or hexane. So watch out for that. Wow, that was a lot of info. Honestly, I left out some details on the materials, the colors, other findings from the lab coat project survey, because I wanted to keep it a little bit on the short side. So subscribe to be notified when I get new videos out on these other topics. And if you thought this was helpful, give it a like. And if you want to get a newsletter monthly that I personally write about science news, new tools I find for scientists, and new product launches and updates, make sure to get on our newsletter. So let me do a quick FAQ recap, just in case you missed something. Number 1, what is the best lab coat for college chemistry students? Well, look at class 2 and class 3 in this video. In most cases, class 2 lab coats won't meet all of the requirements, and if they do, you'll feel like a potato sack wearing them. I designed the class 3 lab coats, so I'm a little biased, but we call them the Lewis and the Curie, and they're designed with data of over 1,000 scientists, and we crowdfunded the whole thing and beta tested it with 30 scientists and science teachers, so I'm pretty confident it's the best one you'll get, and it's worth the extra money. So I'll link to that in the description below if you want to go grab one for yourself. FAQ number 2, what is the most protective lab coat money can buy? That would be this Bulwark Workrite lab coat made of Nomex IIIA fibers in a fabric called Shield CXP from Westex or Milliken. It's FR rated, arc flash rated, and it has great chemical splash resistance to polar solvents, but not non-polar. The downside is the Shield CXP lab coats are usually at least $200, sometimes up to $300, so you really probably don't want one unless you really need that chemical protection. FAQ number 3, what's wrong with the cheaper lab coats on Amazon? In short, the polyester can melt to your skin, plastic buttons make it take too long to get off in a fire or a spill, the neck is usually wide open, and the fit will normally make you feel like a sack of potatoes. Okay, FAQ number 4, how is a doctor's lab coat different from that of a scientist. So for doctors, it's more about the look than the protection. It's not that important to get out of it quickly or to cover your neck and wrists from chemical splashes or flying exploding glass. So these are usually shorter, they have big plastic buttons, and they have lower collars. Many of the best healthcare lab coats also have special antimicrobial coatings and synthetic stretchy fibers, which is great for an office, but it's also a major fire risk in a laboratory. If you made it this far, thank you for caring about lab coat safety. I know it can be a little bit boring, but you stuck with it. For other scientists who might not watch till the end, please put this one thing in the comments. What is the most surprising thing you learned from this video? Thanks for watching, and make sure to subscribe if you want to learn more.